Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Read650's Haunted, True Stories of Superstitions, Premonitions, and Apparitions. I am Read650 founder and editor Edward McCann, and Read650 takes its name from the maximum word count of our true story submissions, which we present on our stage and in our weekly podcast. 650 words translates to a 5-minute spoken word performance, and to engage a reader or a listener in that amount of time in just that tight frame with 2 double-spaced pages is no small task. But the writers that you'll meet today have risen to that challenge, and I am proud to present them to you. I thank everyone who's joined us here in the house today, and everyone who's joined us around the country and around the world on our live stream today as well. I especially thank all of you here in the house for coming out to mask up. I know for some of you, this is the first event that you have come to, an indoor event, and I think that's terrific. And I know that there are special air filtration, et cetera, and all of those things. And hopefully most of us, all of us are vaccinated. We don't know, we hope. But we're thinking good thoughts. But we presented an outdoor event in Bryant Park in July. And this is our first live theater event since we appeared on stage in Lincoln Center in January of 2020. And we're happy to be back here in the Ossie Davis Theater, here in New Rochelle Public Library. We're not exactly back to normal, but we're back in this sort of new normal, still trying to keep each other safe. And each of the writers that you'll meet today have told me how excited they are to participate in this show, and to be back among people who value writers and writing and the spoken word, and to be here on the eve of Halloween. So again, thanks for joining us. And we had many terrific submissions on this topic, and we've curated basically a baker's dozen to present this afternoon in 2 acts. So let's get started. Have you ever had the sense that you were walking among ghosts? Well, Kathleen Donohoe certainly has, and she's here this afternoon to tell us about it. Kathleen is the author of the novels Ghosts of the Missing and Ashes of Fiery Weather, which was named one of Book Riot's 100 must-read New York City novels. Her stories and essays have appeared in many literary journals, in Irish American Magazine, and in the essay anthology, The Writing Irish of New York. She grew up in Brooklyn, the daughter of a nurse and a New York City firefighter, and currently lives there with her husband and son. She opens Act 1 of today's show with That Night on Inishmore. Please give a warm welcome to Kathleen Donohoe.
Midnight, Inishmore. Stepping out of the pub was akin to being blindfolded. The sky was dark, as though swept clear of stars by the rough wind blowing off the sea. There was no landscape, only night. Daniel walked forward with certainty. I kept pace but looked back several times, reassured by the light from the pub. A square of gold that looked not like a window, but a portal, suspended in midair. Too soon, we left it behind. I was 26 years old, and I'd gone to Galway for a writers' conference. Long before the trip was planned, I'd visited a psychic on Long Island, as one does. She had red hair and looked as Irish as I do. She told me I would get the chance to go to Ireland. And when you do, she said, ghosts will walk with you. After the conference, I stayed an extra week to travel. One morning, my friend and I took the ferry from Rossaveel to Inishmore, the largest of the 3 Aran Islands off the coast of Galway. We were lucky to snag a room at a bed and breakfast, given that it was August, and still very much tourist season. That night, she and I went out to the pub where we met Daniel and his friend. Daniel and I were talking for some time before we realized the 2 of them had disappeared. Once we understood they weren't coming back, he offered to walk me to my B&B. I said I wasn't sure if I could find it. Daniel laughed. He'd grown up on Inishmore, and he knew every inch of it. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, where any hour that you try, you can see your hand in front of your face. Brooklyn, where, after dark, is the living you're wary of, not the dead. It was the year 2000, pre-obligatory cell phone, so I had no flashlight with me. As my eyes adjusted, some of the blackness thinned to gray, and I was able to discern the curve of the road. But Daniel pointed left to a field. "This way," he said, starting across. I followed. Occasionally, we called our friends' names, Bridget, Martin, but there was no answer. I was not drunk. This is important to understand. I'd had 2 pints, maybe 3. But Guinness is not strong, and it's very filling. It's a light meal, really. Daniel and I traipsed through the grass. I'm not sure what made me look back. There was no sound but the whisper of the ocean far below. But suddenly, I glanced over my shoulder and saw a body hanging from a tree. White, the way the moon is white, not opaque. It had just enough luster for me to distinguish its shape. Shoulders, a head to the side, and a rope that went from the neck to the tree branch above. I blinked once, then again, expecting the shape to become a rock formation, white with lichen. But it was a man, the ghost of a man. What I did not do: scream, run, ask my companion if he saw it too, afraid that he would say he certainly did, and then tell me the man's name and when he died. Instead, I kept walking. Each time I looked back, the body remained, swinging slightly in a current of salty air, not of my time, I supposed, but his. Years later, I returned to the Long Island Psychic. At one point, she sat across from me, her eyes moving back and forth, and then she asked, "Was there a hanging? Did somebody hang himself?" I nodded. She could not quite get his name. It might begin with a vowel. Vowels were tricky. So were W's. She squinted, cocked her head. "It might be William," she said. "It might be," I agreed. "William."
Anne Levin is a writer and editor who worked for many years as a journalist, including as national news editor for the Associated Press. Before that, she was a reporter for several newspapers in Texas and California, and she continues to review books for the AP as well as for USA Today. She's at work on a memoir, 2 chapters of which have been published in online magazines, and she's a regular contributor to Read650. She joins us today to share a story of childhood creativity and entrepreneurship with The Haunted House. Please say hello to Anne Levin.
Even today, everyone remembers the haunted house. It was the main attraction at the carnivals we used to have in our backyard, which were organized by my older sister Janet and her best friend Paula. Kids would pay $0.25 to get in, play games, eat snacks, and watch Paula's dog jump through a hoop. It might have cost an extra nickel for the haunted house, which was up on the 2nd story of our dilapidated garage. First, you climbed the rickety steps just to the left of where our parents parked the car. Then you were blindfolded and led through a maze past gaping holes in the wooden flooring to a big refrigerator box with 2 slots cut into the side. We had to stick our hands in, and when we did, we discovered 2 bowls. One filled with long, slimy loops that they said were intestines. The other with wet, slippery shapes that were supposedly eyeballs. And even though deep down, we knew that one was cooked spaghetti and the other peeled grapes, it didn't matter. We were scared of what our imaginations conjured. Then again, there were so many things we were scared of when we were little kids, growing up in Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania, population 5,000, in the early 1960s. For starters, the monsters that hid behind the furniture, waiting to come out when our parents turned off the lights. We were afraid to swallow chewing gum. We believed what we were told, that if you accidentally ate a watermelon seed, it would sprout in your belly. If you stepped on a rusty nail, you'd get lockjaw. If you went swimming less than 30 minutes after eating, you were a goner because you'd get cramps and drown. Meanwhile, our lives were filled with dangers we didn't even dream about. Neither did our parents. Our houses were insulated with asbestos. Radon seeped up through the basement. We drove around in fuel-guzzling clunkers that our parents filled with leaded gas, which was actually something we looked forward to because we got to inhale those sweet benzene fumes. Every summer, the 7 of us piled into the family station wagon in the middle of the night to drive over 300 miles to the Jersey shore, and no one wore a seatbelt. We believed in tanning lotion, not sunscreen, and our dad still smoked. It was a kind of freedom or stupidity almost unimaginable today. In the summer, you'd hop on your bike in the morning, naturally without a helmet, and be gone until dark. We'd ride out to the reservoir at Bridgeport, 3 miles outside town, and spend the whole day swimming without a lifeguard. Some of the boys raced their bikes up and down the scrambling patch, which was made out of toxic red slag from the decommissioned coke ovens. Our parents just assumed we were safe. Recently, I got to thinking about the haunted house because Halloween will be upon us soon. People will pay a lot of money to go to commercial venues that attempt to approximate the natural horrors of our garage, which was a falling down wreck from the day my dad bought our house in 1951. There were cobwebs on the windows, bats above the rafters, mice nesting in the woodpile, a heap of rusted garden tools, an ancient gas-powered lawnmower, banged up metal trash cans, huffy bikes with back pedal brakes, and stacks of moldy newspapers. Were our parents crazy for letting us host a haunted house up on the 2nd floor? Maybe I was misremembering. So I called up my siblings, cousins, and the few folks I'm still in touch with from the old days, and everyone agreed. It was amazing that we didn't fall through the splintered floorboards. It was amazing that we didn't get hurt. It was amazing that our parents let us do it. It was amazing that we survived our childhood.
Andrea Raynor is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School. She's a spiritual counselor, speaker, and writer who worked as a hospice chaplain for over 20 years. In the aftermath of September 11th, she served as a chaplain to the temporary morgue at Ground Zero in New York City, offering blessings over remains and support to the workers there. She recently appeared in Spike Lee's new documentary, NYC Epicenter's 9/11 to 2021 and a half, commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and her latest book, Reflections of Grace, Finding Hope at Ground Zero from Simon & Schuster, was released in honor of the 20th anniversary of the attacks. Andrea lives in Rye, New York, where she is also the chaplain to the fire department, and she joins us today to present Living with Ghosts. Please say hello to Andy Raynor.
What did you do on a Saturday night as a kid? If you were at my house, chances are you had a seance. As early as I can remember, we would gather around the dining room table, light a candle, say a prayer, and sit as my father began to channel messages from the world beyond. What else was there to do in Ohio? I thought everybody did this. I took it for granted that one could communicate with the dead, and that this was a natural part of life. This was no parlor game. It was a spiritual hike into the unknown, where my father was the guide and the rest of us followed happily along, feeling safe and full of wonder in his care. Things that went bump in the night were fodder not for fear, but for animated dinner conversation the next day. Mystical encounters were envied and enthusiastically shared. Living with ghosts was a given, and we always had plenty of room at the table for them. In retrospect, my sisters and I probably came off like members of the Adamis family to our prospective high school boyfriends. While not trying to scare them away, I believe my father rather enjoyed observing their reactions when the conversation turned to matters of the spirit, which they inevitably did. Take the night my high school boyfriend Scott was visiting. We were discussing life after death, communication with the dead, normal things. My parents had just returned from the funeral of my mother's cousin, Phyllis, whose death had been ruled a suicide, though there was serious speculation that she had been murdered. Because Scott's grandfather had also recently died, my dad casually asked him if he'd like to see if his grandfather would come through. Scott swallowed hard. Yes? It wasn't meant to be a trick question. The lights went out, the candle lit, prayers were said, and Scott's chair inched closer toward mine. Dad, in semi-trance, said, "Okay, I think I have your grandfather here." He described him in detail before passing on some messages to Scott. When the session seemed to reach its natural conclusion, we lingered in the flickering glow of the candle. The conversation then drifted to my mother's cousin, to her untimely death and the suspicion surrounding it. I watched my father's eyes narrow for a moment, as if squinting again into the spirit world. My sense is that this was not a suicide, he said softly. As soon as the words left his mouth, there was a loud bang on the closet door. See, we all agreed, that's Phyllis, telling you that you're right. What? Asked Scott, looking as if he was about to make a run for it. What do you mean that's Phyllis? Is she in there? Maybe something just fell. My mom laughed apologetically, realizing the nonchalance with which the rest of us had accepted the bang on the door as being a message from Phyllis. Then she explained how Phyllis's nursing uniform was in that closet, the one she died in, the one that still had her blood on it. They had brought it home with them after the funeral to preserve the evidence. Walking over to the closet door, she opened it and stood there like Vanna White, revealing everything was in order. Even by candlelight, I could see Scott's face grow pale as he watched her carefully remove a plastic bag from the shelf, knowing it contained the uniform. "Would you like to see it?" Mom asked. We could never prove what happened to Phyllis, although many people certainly tried. And I cannot prove that one Saturday night at my family's seance table began the long goodbye to my high school romance. But somewhere, ghosts are giggling, while others wait for justice. Truth is banging at the door. Let me out. Let me out.
Tara O'Grady is a singer, songwriter, recording artist, published author, and intuitive educator. As a Bliss ambassador, she teaches people how to awaken their creativity, open their awareness, and learn how to spread their wings. She leads workshops and retreats and traveled from her home in Beacon today to share an excerpt from her memoir, Migrating Toward Happiness, the soundtrack to my spiritual awakening. The piece she selected revisits the October night she discovered how thin the veil between worlds really is, especially in Ireland. Here's Tara O'Grady with the night my granny died. Tara.
I was awake the length of the night, listening to the wind. It thrashed against the house, rattling the foundation. The roof felt as though it would lift. I'd never heard wind speak to me like that. It whistled and howled and cried like a woman. I covered my ears with blankets to muffle the maddening cries, imagining myself as Dorothy with cows flying by the window. But I wasn't in Kansas. I was in Donegal, restlessly stirring in the middle of an autumn night as my granny lay in her bed with a nurse by her side. Until recently, this ball of energy had been dancing with Skippy, who'd bark in tune with her song. Her bicycle rarely collected dust. She was 84 with sights set on the 100. But in the past few weeks, Granny casually mentioned her organs weren't behaving properly. We had all arrived with short notice, a phone call, a plane ride, a quiet but long drive through country roads leading to the farm where I had just spent the summer. I hadn't expected to be back again so soon. The wind suddenly ceased its howling. Not one crack of light outlined the frame of the window. Suddenly, my bedroom door burst open. "She's going," my aunt called into the darkness. I leaped from the bed and struggled to find my shoes in the frigid room. I found my family standing in a circle around Granny's body, reciting the rosary, rushing one Hail Mary after the next, as if to squeeze them in before her spirit left the room. I didn't join in. The prayers felt false on my tongue, like a script that didn't suit my character. "She's gone," the nurse said mid-prayer. Emotional and jet-lagged, I crawled back under the covers of my bed, escaping the dozens of relations whose voices filled the house. Suddenly, the door swung open. My aunt entered the room searching for her daughter's hairdryer. She couldn't find it and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The door opened again. This time it was my cousin who rummaged through the wardrobe and lifted unlaundered clothes off the floor. "I found it," she called, closing the door behind her. A few moments later, the door opened again, with another aunt searching for a mirror to brush her hair. When the door opened a fourth time, I bolted upright to confront whichever relation had decided to disturb me yet again. I didn't see anyone, but I knew I was not alone in that room. Perhaps the intruder was looking for her shoes. I leaned over the right side of the bed to examine the floor. Then my heart stopped. I held my breath as the imprint of a form sitting down took its shape on top of the wool blankets. The weight of the mattress shifted. Within an instant, before my brain could translate what my eyes were seeing, a dead weight forced me back onto the pillow. My hands were up at my shoulders like a suspect under arrest. I was paralyzed. I couldn't breathe. Crushed under the weight of this invisible force, I waited, frightened out of my mind. My eyes scanned the ceiling above me. Then a voice whispered into my left ear. It was a soft, angelic voice. I strained to hear what it said, but the words were muffled as the blood rushed to my ears. "I must speak," I told myself. I opened my mouth. No sound came out. I needed to ask if she was there. I needed to know what she'd just said. A high-pitched, trembling whisper finally escaped my throat, and I managed to call out to the room, "Granny!" Immediately, the invisible force released its grasp, and I leapt from the bed like a spring, threw open the door, and raced down the hallway outside to the rain.
David Masello began his career as a nonfiction book editor at Simon & Schuster and then went on to hold senior editorial positions at many magazines, including Travel and Leisure, Art and Antiques, and Town and Country. He's currently executive editor of Milieu, a magazine about design. David's a widely published essayist and poet, with pieces appearing in the New York Times, Best American Essays, and numerous literary and art magazines. He's also the author of 2 books about art and architecture. 30 years ago, on Halloween Eve, David attended the memorial service for a young friend. The spirit of the deceased was honored, though the friend, it seems, may have also acknowledged everyone's presence. And while your program lists a different title, David returns to the Read650 stage this afternoon to read the memorial. Please say hello to David Masello.
Something happened at Johnny's memorial service that I was never able to speak about with anyone else who'd been there. The other people gathered that day in Johnny's living room, which had become his dying room, are no longer friends or acquaintances. Sometimes these many years later, I question the occurrences and wonder if I've invented details. But I wrote down the events exactly as they happened with no embellishing as soon as I got home that night, Halloween Eve, 1991, because I knew that someday I would begin to doubt them. I've thought again about that final visit from Johnny, or whatever it should be called, especially years later when I took a job where I could have fulfilled Johnny's greatest writerly desire, been able to give him the work he needed and wanted. Lem, Johnny's surviving partner, though he would die a year later, greeted each guest at the memorial service, held in the room not only where Johnny had died, but also within sight of the mattress on which he had done his dying. Most of the people who attended the service had seen Johnny in that bed. I hadn't. I'd only heard through friends, as if spirit mediums, what he'd been saying about his state of body. For this celebration of life, the bed had been neatly made, the sheet, blanket, blue quilt wrapped about the mattress as precisely as a birthday present. Everyone who entered what had once been the ornate parlor room of a 19th century Italianate townhouse scanned the expanse of bedding, looking for something that indicated Johnny's presence. A wrinkle on the quilt, the negative indentation of his tall, slim body, a shadow-like head imprint on the wall. Early in our friendship, Johnny, a writer, had surprised me by saying, if I could write about anything, it would be gardens. What it's like to occupy them, walk the paths, tend them, grow them. That would never bore me. Years later, I had come to edit a garden column at a big, glossy magazine where I could have answered that desire of his. This anecdote about Johnny's wish to write about gardens, this piece of his history, only 26 years in the making, is what I wanted to talk about that evening when Lem asked us to share sentiments before a farewell toast. The 20 of us assembled into an ellipse. People recounted their memories of Johnny, the ring sporadically broken as someone pivoted outward, bending to wipe away tears, an action that reminded me of old carnival shooting galleries of ducks. I said nothing to the group about Johnny and his love of gardens, not because I feared losing my composure, but because I hadn't earned the right to do so. I never visited Johnny after he became bedridden, and so I felt like a fraud, a peripheral, ghostly friend who'd only conveyed regards and concern through others. The moment for the final toast had come. Standing on either side of me were Johnny's parents. We're going to say to Johnny, Lem instructed us. We'll say it in unison, then raise our glasses of champagne. And so, at the very moment those words, to Johnny, were shouted as if a Greek chorus, each of us pinching the stem of our blown glass goblets high in the air, arms stretched to their fullest, the chandelier in the room dimmed all the way down. I remember each crystal droplet losing its light, fading from a radiant yellow brightness to a Victorian rosiness, then to nothing. The ceiling's plaster acanthus leaves darkening into shadows, withering from sight. Johnny's mother swung around to the room's dimmer switch to find no one there, her string of pearls clattering as they whipped against her neck. She spun with such velocity that one of her golden earrings flew off, ricocheting against a wall. She turned to me and whispered in a tone that held both panic and hope, "Could it be?" As I bent to retrieve her earring, I replied, "How could it not?"
Raised in Norfolk, Virginia, Sharon Forman is a Reform rabbi who's worked for 24 years in the field of Jewish education. She's the author of Honest Answers to Your Child's Jewish Questions, and most recently, the Baseball Haggadah, a festival of freedom and springtime in 15 innings. Sharon has written for Mother's Always Right, Kveller, Mama Load, Literary Mama, and The Bitter Southerner, and she lives with her husband and 3 children here in Westchester County, where she teaches bar and bar mitzvah students. Bat mitzvah students. Sharon returns to the Read650 stage this afternoon to read her essay, Ghosts at the Costco. Please welcome Sharon Forman.
10:30 at night, and the house is quiet. At his desk, my husband, a cardiologist, studies a stack of electrocardiograms, his pen circling suspicious troughs and peaks, the steady or interrupted drumming of another heartbeat. I fight off sudden chills. I'm a practical woman and a rabbi who does not waste energy worrying about what comes after this life. Yet now, in the silence of my home, I wonder if I too have begun to detect the echoes of distant heartbeats. I wonder if I believe in ghosts. Until that day, over a decade ago, I'd never been able to explain the dread that overtakes me whenever I approach our local Costco, an innocuous giant box store with gray cement walls and abundant towers of triple fudge brownie mix. But before I even get out of my car, a magnetic tug propels me to flee. That winter morning, I was determined to conquer any disturbing sensations and restock our pantry with enough frozen waffles to open my own pancake house. But as soon as I entered the cavernous warehouse, it began again. My hands tingled with electric shocks when I grasped the shopping cart. An inexplicable sadness settled over me. My chest throbbed as if I needed to nurse a hungry infant. Was I experiencing an anxiety attack? Was I losing my mind? By the time I returned home, my heart ached so much I could hardly breathe. I swallowed 2 of the 1,200 ibuprofen tablets I had just purchased and turned to my computer. Maybe Facebook would distract my racing thoughts. Coincidentally, a friend had just posted about another Costco, praising that store's expansive kosher selections. I commented sourly, "Does anyone else feel ill at the Costco in Westchester?" Later that night, I returned to Facebook and read a stranger's startling response. "I never go to that Westchester Costco because of all that business with the Jewish cemetery." About 4 seconds of detective work on the computer unspooled the mystery. For 100 years, a synagogue and its cemetery overlooked the Yonkers Hill, where the Costco now stands. Unable to afford the cemetery upkeep, the few elderly surviving members gave their land to developers, but only in exchange for a promise that the cemetery's inhabitants, including 147 children, would be reburied in Jerusalem. A recent investigation had revealed that the remains of only 12 could be accounted for in Israel. The balance on that Costco receipt included 135 dead Jewish children's remains lying beneath the concrete floor where I had just pushed my shopping cart. I close my laptop and sit down on the couch to fold the laundry, still warm from the dryer. My hands fold and crease, flattening my son's pants, reuniting my daughter's pink socks. If only my mind could be smoothed so easily. But I cannot stop thinking about those children. Perhaps I sense their presence because I'm so attuned to the past, to the ways it persists into the present. As a Jew, I am commanded to remember Sabbaths, festivals, tyrants, covenants, commandments. All are supposed to be engraved in memory, a heavy habit passed through generations, as enduring as the physical attributes we inherit: a widow's peak, long toes, an allergy to the bumpy skin of strawberries. Who or what remembered me as I stood on that old sacred ground? After millions of years on this planet, I suppose we are all walking over the bones of each other, yet it's only the souls of these stricken children who call to me, whose presence on that windy hill triggers my restless heartbeat. I wish I knew how to honor them, these long dead children, whose mothers surely love them as fiercely as I love mine. But I can only murmur the words my people have always uttered in the face of loss, the blessing recited upon hearing of a death. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed is the true judge.
Annabel Monaghan is the author of 2 novels for young adults, A Girl Named Digit and Double Digit, both from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And she's also the author of Does This Volvo Make My Butt Look Big? A collection of hilarious and moving essays based on her column in the Huffington Post, The Week, and the Rye Record. Annabel lives in Rye with her husband and 3 sons, and her first novel for adults, Nora Goes Off Script, will be published by G.P. Putnam's Sons next June. The piece Annabel shares today for our Haunted event could be filed under the topic, Demonic Possession of Inanimate Objects. And she joins us now to read Macabre Tales of My Mandoline. Please help me welcome Annabel back to the Read 650 stage.
"15 years ago, my mother-in-law gave me a mandolin for my birthday. When I try to talk to my friends about the mandolin, they think I'm referring to an instrument in the lute family, which actually might have been a better gift for me. This device is the culinary kind. The box says it's supposed to quickly slice, shred, crinkle, waffle, and julienne my fruits and vegetables. To date, it has julienned nothing but my fingers. When I first opened it, I was pleased that my mother-in-law thought I was the sort of person who would insist on my carrots having ridges and my potatoes being waffly. Today's the day we take dinner up a notch, I thought. A moment later, I'd sliced my finger, fashioned a tourniquet out of paper towels, and shut that box for what I hoped was the last time. I placed it on a high shelf. It's a universal truth that you should just give away whatever is on the high shelf, especially if you're 5'3". The moment you put it there, you've acknowledged the fact that you're not going to use it again. It sits up there with the soup tureen and the thigh master. But every few years, I take it down and I try again. I decide I'm going to take an Idaho potato and turn it into waffle fries, even though you can buy waffle fries already waffled in the freezer section of the grocery store. My kids beg me not to. They suspect the problem with the mandolin is user-related. They've told me 1,000,000 times that I'm even reckless with a cheese grater. And 1,000,000 times I've rolled my eyes at them on my way to find the Band-Aids. Years ago, when the organizing lady came to my kitchen, we spent a lot of time talking about the mandolin. To be honest, I find it sort of cathartic to talk about. She said that if I don't use it, I should give it away to someone who should. Such an easy thing to say, but the issues run deep. The guilt over not having appreciated or even successfully used that gift one time. The implied failure in serving my kids potatoes that are shaped like, well, baked potatoes. Finally, I tried the Japanese decluttering trick of holding it close to me to see if it brought me joy. Of course, I left it in the box while snuggling it to my neck. I don't have a death wish. I found no joy in the mandolin. The object invokes terror, like Chucky from that horror movie, in his innocent but blood-stained overalls. I looked up and saw the newly empty space on the top shelf and felt a wave of possibilities wash over me. I resigned to give it away. If you'll follow me a bit deeper into my madness, I'll admit that I wasn't sure I actually could give it away. This thing is so dangerous that I'm worried about where it's going to end up. I worry that some young newlywed is going to see it at the Salvation Army, entertain fantasies about impressing her mother-in-law with julienne vegetables, and with one swift motion of the safety guard, lose all of her fingers. Not on my watch. Which is how I found myself at the Salvation Army, very carefully placing my boxed mandolin on the counter and taking a step back as if it would detonate at any moment. I explained to the man working there that it was a very dangerous object. I regaled him with a decade of tales about my own flesh wounds. I told him about how my plumber, Bob, had just seen this device on my counter and remarked that his sister had lost the tips of all the fingers on her left hand using that thing. The man said, "Then why in the world would we want this?" "Exactly," I replied. I grabbed the offending box and put it back in the trunk of my car, which is where it still is, eerily just over my shoulder at all times.
Read650 is a nonprofit literary organization with a mission to promote writers. And in a publishing environment where it is often challenging to find or to hear new voices, we take that mission very seriously. And we've created this quality platform for writers, a forum for true personal stories told 5 minutes and 650 words at a time. Our events are not open mic shows, and there's nothing random or improvisational about what we do. We do place a strong emphasis on the craft of writing, and the submissions featured on our stage were selected and vetted by an editorial committee of writers of essays, novels, memoirs, and plays. And today's event is made possible in part, as they say on PBS, by viewers like you. Your donation is an investment in our mission, and it enables us to present this quality work in this quality way, and we cannot thank you enough for being here and for supporting this work. At Read650, we're always working to broaden our submission pool and feature new and diverse voices, and right now, with 2 whole weeks to go until our November 1st deadline, we are still collecting submissions for money. So from piggy banks to hedge funds, tell us in 650 or fewer words about your experience with or your relationship to money. Think about the lemonade stand, the tooth fairy, the yard sale, your cashier job, the robbery, the windfall, the auction, or the inheritance. December 1 is the deadline for time, and we hope the writers listening will tell us about that flight, the grandfather clock, the church bells, the marathon, the curfew, or the temp job where time stood still. Or as Annabel once said, where the clock actually moved backwards. So if anything inspires you here, please start writing because time is wasting. The details and dates of these and other upcoming topics are in your programs and on our website, read650.org. Please follow us on social media and share your email address during the reception so we can stay in touch. If you're thinking about contributing, I say stop thinking and start writing, because we would love to hear from you. And we're going to pause here for a short break of about 20 minutes, but please stay with us. And when you hear this bell, that is your signal to return to your seat or to your computer or iPhone or smart TV, because we have more great storytelling coming up in Act 2. I'm Ed McCann, and this is Read 650. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Welcome back to our second half. If you're just joining us on Facebook or YouTube, this is Read 650, and I'm Ed McCann. Today's show, Haunted, True Stories of Superstitions, Premonitions, and Apparitions, is coming to you live from the Ossie Davis Theater in New Rochelle, New York. And before we bring up our next writer, I want to acknowledge a few of the people and organizations who have helped make this afternoon possible. We are here today with the support from the New Rochelle Council on the Arts, the Friends of the New Rochelle Public Library, and the New Rochelle Downtown Business Improvement District. And for all their help pulling this event and our podcast together, I thank my partner and Read 650 executive producer Richard Colath, our editor Stephen Lewis, David Masello, and Lisa Donati-Mayer, and our producer and very own marketing guru Jim Russick for her technical expertise and moral support. I'm also very grateful to Sarah Caldwell, who we literally couldn't do this without, and for help coordinating the details of today's event here at the theater. I also thank Jessica Rayo and the library's Lisa Itzkowitz and Ed Roddy. And so, yes, it's a lot of thanks, and we are feeling very thankful. So, yeah. And now back to our show. Raised in the Bronx, Patricia Dunn is the author of the highly acclaimed young adult novel Rebels by Accident. And Publishers Weekly called her debut adult novel, Last Stop on the 6th, quote, an enjoyable story of a woman's return to her riotous Italian-American family in the Bronx on the eve of the Persian Gulf War. Pat's writing has appeared in Salon, The Village Voice, The Nation, LA Weekly, The Christian Science Monitor, and in the New York Times bestselling anthology, Love, Inshallah, The Secret Love Lives of American Muslim Women. She has served as the Senior Director of the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College and is a co-founder of the Joe Papaleo Writers Workshop in Cetera, Italy. And though Pat avoids spilling salt, walking under ladders, or stepping on cracks in the pavement, she has made her way safely here today to share an excerpt from her new book, Last Stop on the 6th. Won't you please give a very warm welcome to Pat Dunn.
Where I grew up, if it fell off the truck, that meant someone was trying to impress you. They wanted you to believe their car stereo or home entertainment system was stolen and worth a lot more than they paid for it. The thing was, and everybody who wasn't street stupid knew, when something really was stolen, you never even implied that it wasn't a legit purchase, but some bargain at Circuit City. I grew up in the Bronx, New York, Pelham Bay, the last stop on the 6th line. We were all superstitious, never stepped on a crack or walked under a ladder, and many of us wore gold horn chains around our necks to protect us from the evil eye. Under no circumstances did we celebrate winning the lottery, a trifecta at OTB, or bingo at Our Lady of Assumption, until after the winnings were banked or spent. In my neighborhood, if someone told you a ghost story, they were trying to scare you witless. The hauntings usually happened to some relative from the other side. We never asked the other side of what. We all knew that meant southern Italy, or somewhere even further away. When a person lived their own ghost story, they never spoke of it. Speaking of it was certain to drive you mad. Still, their hollow, sunken eyes, their talking out loud to themselves when they thought no one was listening, exposed their truth. These were not Edgar Allan Poe or Stephen King-like hauntings, though sometimes revenge was the motivation for a dead wife's return from the afterlife to kick her cheating husband's ass. Every family has their stuff, after all. A priest wasn't called in to do an exorcism, though where I grew up, The Exorcist was considered a documentary. You didn't vanquish family, though sometimes you vanquished yourself. Where I grew up, I was a girl who didn't see ghosts. The girl who thought holy moths were mystical creatures that adults invented to scare children. The girl convinced that plastic saints promised false hope. The girl who couldn't believe in miracles, so she ran far, far away. In that distant land, I was the girl who stood steadfast and strove to save the world. Over time, the stories I told myself about where I grew up spun out of control. And though there were no visible signs or hollow sunken eyes, the ghosts I wouldn't let myself see, strong and fierce, until at almost 30, I was lost and alone in a crowd of thousands. That's the funny thing about ghosts. The farther you run, the harder you resist, the less transparent they appear. I was the girl who returned home, haunted. And when I sat on my stoop, felt the cold, and faced the shadows in the windows from my past, the world stopped spinning. My mother was right to feel sorry for me, but wrong when she said, "You still haven't got a clue." The clues were all there. They always have been. I was the tough girl from the Bronx, strong-willed, hard-headed, and loud, but not a cliche. I was an activist who stood up for others, and I made a difference. Well, at least I hoped. Thank you.
Our next writer doesn't appear in your program due to my error, and if we were on Broadway today, this revision would be on an annoying scrap of paper that would likely have fallen under your sleep by now. But Charlotte Adamis is a recently retired middle school librarian who lives in the Mid-Hudson Valley, and her nonfiction piece, Autobiography of a Period in 5 Irregular Chapters, was published in herstory.com, and she's workshopped 2 of her nonfiction stories with TMI Project. In this piece, she has taken a nuanced approach to what can often seem like a fixed choice, with a true tale of her journey from belief in the supernatural to unbelief and to almost back again. Please welcome Charlotte Adamis, who joins us here today to read Of Gods and Vampires. Charlotte Adamis.
So I grew up in a family that disdained the imaginary. Not even the God of Abraham could get past the mezuzah on our front door. So how did I become the kind of kid who could believe that a vampire lived in her bedroom closet? A girl who could make a protective ritual out of tapping against the closet door 3 times and then wrapping herself head to toe in sheets and blankets. And what about that night when I heard my pet turtles, Mabel and Frankie, having a conversation? I can't tell you what they said. They were probably complaining, though. The water inside their tiny turtle island stunk like unwashed armpits. And then there was the night. My mother told the 4 of us girls, "No more underpants to bed." "You don't need them," she said. But I did. I needed to feel them under my nightgown, and I couldn't fall asleep without them. So I lay there in the bottom bunk wishing for my undies, too scared of the vampire to leave my bed. The next thing I knew, the bottom drawer opened, and a pair flew across the room to me. It was a miracle. But it didn't feel so miraculous when I was 9. And I dreamt my Jewish grandmother's coffin was being carried by 6 nuns, only to wake up in the morning to find out she really had died overnight. And then one night, maybe 6 months later, my parents were having a dinner party. I kept creeping down the stairs with one excuse after another, hungry, thirsty, until one of the guests brought me back to my room. He nodded to the upper bunk where my oldest stepsister was fast asleep. "What's eating you?" he said. "Vampires?" I said. He didn't laugh, though. He didn't tell me I was nuts either, like my parents probably would have. Like I said, I was raised by people who didn't believe. But here's what he did tell me. He said, I could think of my life as a movie. And you can change the movie, he said, anytime you want. So I made a new kind of movie for myself, one without vampires or flying underwear or talking turtles. I only had one more unwelcome brush with the supernatural. It happened when I was 16, and I woke up one August morning knowing that my grandfather was dead. After that, I turned my nose up at anything I couldn't quantify, document, or witness for myself. Everything from vampires to gods. Yet for the past 20 years or so, I've been dipping my toe back into the murky waters of belief, only to pull it out again whenever anyone tries to slap a label on it. My friend Karen, she tells me, I'm not really an atheist. I'm not. You're an agnostic, she says. Possibly. There are moments. Like when I'm floating, belly up in the lake, and I watch the wind whisper through the dwarf pines that dot the white Shawangum ridgeline above me. Or in the early mornings, when I sit in the dark on my meditation cushion, and time holds briefly still. Then recently, when I paid a visit to my parents, my 93-year-old stepfather shook his head at me and said in the voice of a frightened child, I have questions. I took his bony hand in mine. About after? He nodded. It's your move, Dad, I said. Your movie, Dad. You get to choose what you think comes after. My mother shot me a sideways glance like, what are you, nuts? I hope not. Because I've come to believe that we all just need a narrative that works for us. Some people need to imagine vampires. For others, it's gods. For now, I'm satisfied with knowing that when the curtain goes down and the lights come up, my molecules will disperse to continue their part in a much larger story. And what's so scary about that? Thank you.
Minnette Coleman was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and began her writing career reporting on her high school's activities for the city's first integrated youth magazine. She also wrote jazz reviews for the Atlanta Daily World and graduated from Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, with a degree in drama and speech. Minnette has performed in theaters in the South and off-Broadway in New York, including the historic Ridiculous Theatrical Company in the Village, and she authored and toured a one-woman show, Hand-Me-Downs, about the Civil Rights Movement. Minnette's first writing awards were for poetry on social justice and women's rights. And since then, she has also authored 3 novels, The Blacksmith's Daughter, No Death by Unknown Hands, and The Tree, A Journey to Freedom. Her work has appeared in several publications, and as a member of the prestigious Harlem Writers Guild, Minnette continues to write Black historical fiction because, as she says, she doesn't want our stories to be forgotten. Today, Minnette presents a true story that comes with a warning to anyone considering a trip to Jamaica and a visit to one especially notorious tourist attraction. This is Minnette Coleman reading The Ghost Gave Me Gas. Please welcome Minnette.
After 3 days basking in the Jamaican sun, our young daughters demanded an adventure. My husband suggested a waterfall park. Not exciting enough, they said, opting for a tour of Rose Hall Plantation, home of the White Witch. Tired of Caribbean splendor, they wanted to be scared. The estate guide shared tales of the beautiful but despicable owner who displayed severed heads of captured slaves from her boudoir balcony. Traps were once set around her property to maim or kill those attempting to escape. And the stories about the potions she slipped into her guest cocktails almost prevented me from enjoying my daily rum punch. I said almost. My thirst returned after lunch. Even dead, though, the White Witch's spells prevailed. A falling chandelier nearly killed an actress during the production of the film Wide Sargasso Sea. And a mirror in the White Witch's bedroom promised her muddled but ghostly image when a photo was taken. Our girls demanded one, though I scoffed and said nothing would appear when we developed the film back home. I was buying souvenirs and arrived late as the tour finished up at the White Witch's tomb. There, surrounded by captivated tourists, I made an arrogant non-believer's mistake. 3 crucifixes were carved at the top and the sides of the ornate tomb on its lid, but not at the bottom. As I touched the vault, I asked why. The guide replied, "It's open in case she needs to get back in." "So," I said, trying to be logical, "that means she can also get out?" I fainted immediately. When I came to, my husband was holding me, my daughters were visibly shaken, and the other members of our tour had dispersed. "That never happened before," the guide whispered as he gave me water. "You must have angered her." Embarrassed, I laughed it off, saying, "I skipped breakfast." After lunch, though, I started feeling gassy and accidentally let a roar of a fart rip in the hotel elevator. I apologized, thankful it was just my family staring at me. Thus began 3 days during which I was plagued with flamboyant flatulence. While not noxious in odor, my turbulence erupted at the most inopportune times. At the resort reggae party, it arrived like a bang at the end of I Shot the Sheriff. Everyone was either blunt high or half drunk on potent pina coladas and red stripe beer, so no one seemed to know the difference or be the wiser. But after that, I avoided crowds when I felt that high wind in Jamaica slipping from my body. My husband joked, "Your mama has enough gas to fly us back home." I took the resort nurse into my confidence. She asked, "Did you drink the water?" "We drank bottled everything. We didn't even use the ice." But there were those few sips at Rose Hall. She said, nodding. You done upset the witch. She actually believed a dead specter gave me gas and sent me packing with enough Pepto to constipate an elephant. It helped, but still, I looked over my shoulder whenever the spirit hit me. The day we left, I was fart-free. Perhaps the curse ended with my departure. Back home, my Caribbean internist assured me I was fine. But when I made a flippant remark about the white witch, she set her stethoscope down, locked eyes with mine, and said, "You got off easy. People still died there from saying the wrong thing about that deceased sorceress." Those words returned to me when we developed the pictures from our trip and saw that promised ghostly image in the mirror. When I touched the photo, I farted. When I shared it with my daughters, I farted again. I accepted my fate. I had definitely been cursed. My husband placed the photo in the 1993 vacation album. I never touched or looked at it again, fearing if I did, a rumble would rise in my belly and I'd be transported back to Rose Hall and that evil, spirit-induced flatulence.
Michael Vargas is a historian, teacher, and author. His first book, Taming a Brood of Vipers, Conflict and Change in 14th Century Dominican Convents, which sounds ripe for a 6-part Hulu series, won La Coronica Journal's International Book Prize. His second book is Constructing Catalan Identity, Memory, Imagination, and the Medieval. Michael teaches courses on Mediterranean towns, medieval inquisitions, the Crusades, sacred violence, and deep history. And he writes a blog, Making It Medieval. Michael traveled today from his home in New Paltz to share a multi-generational ghost story, family inheritance. Please give a warm welcome to Michael Vargas.
On both sides of the Mexican-U.S. border, ghosts exert an influence upon my family's sense of the past. And as a historian, I know that the most truthful stories make room for phantasms. My great-grandfather, Sebastián Vargas, rode with Pancho Villa. He was Villa's treasurer in the Estado del Norte during the Mexican Revolution. He traveled from Chihuahua to New York to oversee the printing of the sabanas Villa used to pay his army. Some say that Sebastián didn't always circulate all the money he printed. By 1916, with the US government rankled by Villa's antics and Villa losing battles on the field, in his paranoia, he began to turn against his friends. Sebastián, imprisoned ahead of Villa's dispatch of orders to the firing squad, turned himself into a zombie. The drug he consumed in jail, cocaine, tucked into the gums, didn't kill him, but made him sick enough that the guards permitted his wife and daughter one last visit. The women dressed Sebastián, now among the living dead, in their own clothing, then walked out with him into a horse-drawn wagon. They raced off from Chihuahua to El Paso in Texas, beyond Villa's jurisdiction. Sebastián had a son, Sergio, who returned to live in Chihuahua. Uncle Si, as we called him, was one of the few men in Chihuahua in 1950 who had any medical background. Si lived with his large family in the tree-lined neighborhood on Calle 25 between the cathedral and the hospital. That year, Dolores, a housekeeper known to the family, died during the delivery of twins. Her surviving child, a young girl named Elda, fell ill almost immediately thereafter. Uncle Si and his large family took Elda into their home, but Elda's health didn't improve as it should have. The family sensed her most debilitating malady was grief and feared she was dying too. That is when the series of odd phenomena began. First came the scratching from under the furnace grate, then the bumps and bangs on an adjacent wall. Days later came the sound of a door closing when everyone present could see that it remained open. Finally, the groans and whimpers began, barely audible at first, but growing more distinct into the voice of a woman in pain, the voice of Dolores. For weeks that summer, the poltergeist's appearances came as regular as clockwork. Noises emerged from the walls at about 6 in the evening. By 8, Dolores was calling to her daughter, "Elda, Elda." By 10, she was gone. Dolores continued her visitations for more than a month into September. Scratching noises, doors opening and shutting, and the voice calling to her daughter and asking for prayers. The family called the local bishop, and large crowds gathered around the house to gossip and peek through the windows. That's when the local press, both the Heraldo and the Tribuna, sent reporters to record the fenómenos ultraterrenos, the unearthly phenomena. Dolores' paranormal visit came to an end with a clear message to Elda. You will join me, but only after you live a long and rich life. Elda recovered and left the Vargas family to live with an aunt and uncle, and all seemed to return to normal. Finally, months later, on Christmas Day, as Uncle Si's 7 children sat facing each other in the hallway, each heard Dolores' whisper, "May God bless you for the care you showed to my daughter."
Corinne O'Shaughnessy is a retired New York City public school literacy teacher whose essays have been published in Herstory, the Dead Mule School of Southern Literature, and Dorothy Parker's Ashes.com, among others. Her fiction has been published in SurvivorLit.org and BookOfMatchesLit.com, and she's been a resident of the Malay Colony, a multidisciplinary artist colony nestled against the Berkshire foothills. Corinne currently resides in Mexico, where she's trying to learn Spanish and figure out the intricacies of salsa dancing. And she joins us here this afternoon to read her contribution to today's special haunted event, a true story entitled 5. Please say hello to Corinne O'Shaughnessy.
Asking Jimmy for a divorce had shattered us both. He followed me everywhere, demanding we stay together. Sometimes I'd wake up to find him sitting next to the bed, just staring at me, hunting me. But what haunted me most after Jim passed away, succumbing to his own addictions, was that he had died alone, surrounded by his 3 cats. No one should go that way. And then I inherited those cats. I am not a cat person. I just figured it was a way for Jim to keep messing with me. One cat, named 5 after the sewage treatment tank Jimmy had rescued him from, had the same beautiful hazel eyes and white hair as Jimmy did. And much like Jimmy's aversion to change, 5 struggled to get comfortable in his new home. For weeks, he hid under my son's bed. Then he started to, stalk me. Every morning, I'd find him sitting outside my bedroom door. He'd stare a good morning, and when I'd head to the kitchen to make coffee, he'd follow me, batting at my legs until I stopped to pet him. When I tried to move on, he'd chase me, batting at me again, demanding more. After a while, 5 started pissing on my walls. Tests revealed he had a thickened bladder lining, a chronic condition. He was prescribed buprenorphine, ironically, the last opiate Jimmy was on. Unlike Jimmy, though, 5 lived fairly comfortably on his pain medication until his kidneys started to fail. My son and I drew solace from holding his paws and stroking his fur as the vet gave him his final injection. Days after 5's death, I was bartending at a holiday party at the university where I worked. A gentleman with an Eastern European accent ordered a glass of wine, then asked if I was wearing contacts or were those my real eyes. We bantered a bit and I laughed as he walked off. Sometime later, he returned and I thought he wanted a refill, but instead he said, "I'm having a hard time reading you. I think you're a Virgo, but maybe a Libra." I was a little stunned. I'm a Virgo, on the cusp of Libra. Have you ever seen the movie The Sixth Sense? Yes, I said, opening to Stella Artois. A long time ago. I don't remember it well. I have abilities like the boy, he said. Not the same, but similar. I've had them since I was a child. I was born in a graveyard. I desperately wanted to know his birth story, but as I was opening a bottle of Prosecco, all I said was, "That must have been very difficult for you." And when I looked up again, he had moved on to joking with his colleagues. When he did return for a refill, the party was starting to wind down. "There's light over your head," he said. "I see the letters JM. Did you lose someone with the initials JM?" "No," I said, avoiding his eyes and scanning the bar for white wine bottles that needed to be shoved back into ice. "No one. Jim's last name was Boyle." "I'm hearing, 'I miss you, I love you,'" he said. "It's J, maybe GM. GM. Jim." My brain waves started to feel like they were traveling through mud. "My husband died 2 years ago," I said, the mud thickening. "His name was Jim." I didn't explain that we were no longer husband and wife and that he had died alone, leaving me brutally heartsick. "Did he tap you a lot?" "I'm getting tapped, lots of tapping." "No, he didn't tap me." But I didn't tell him that 5 did. Every morning after I opened my door, batting at my legs until I stopped to pet him.
Cari Pattison is a native of Kansas, and she serves as part-time pastor of the Woodstock Reformed Church in Woodstock, New York, where she also works at the nearby Euphoria Yoga Studio and the Golden Notebook Bookstore. An Appalachian Trail thru-hiker, former public school English teacher, and regular contributor to Read650, Cari earned her Master's of Divinity at Princeton Seminary and served as associate pastor for 12 years at the Reformed Church of Bronxville. She's traveled here today to share a disorienting and illuminating experience from her first year on that job in Bronxville. And this is Cari Pattison reading The Bronxville Exorcist.
Pastor Cari, the woman's voice on the phone drops. "I think my house is haunted." Minutes later, I am on my way to the house of Mrs. M, not her real name, lamenting how little my recent seminary education prepared me for this. In class, we had debated the meaning of those stories where Jesus casts out demons. Were these misunderstood encounters with mental illness, first-century cases of PTSD or addiction, or true miracles of divine deliverance? I park my car in the drive of Mrs. M's Tudor-style house, and she comes to the door radiant in blonde highlights and silky white tunic. I brought some liturgies for a home blessing, I say. It's the closest thing I could find for the occasion. Her foyer gleams with white upholstery, beige rugs, cream-colored curtains, and several mirrors, which I find disorienting. A glossy mounted photograph of running horses covers an entire wall. It feels almost like a funhouse, all the mirrors appearing to be portals into still more silky white rooms. She holds out some sage she just lit with a match. I read that smudging helps clear out the bad energy, she says. Does it smell too much like pot? She serves me Pellegrino in a crystal tumbler and tells me about the ghosts. Her boys started hearing noises at night a few weeks earlier. Then she began researching the history of the house and found that a young woman may have died there in the 1920s. Do you believe in ghosts, she asks? What does the Bible say about spirits? Do dead people really haunt places they lived? Is it some kind of purgatory? My Presbyterian head pounds. Where are my Pentecostal and Catholic friends when I need them? I ask her when the nocturnal disturbances began and how long they last, as if I'm some kind of intake nurse, gathering and typing up the data before the head ghost examiner comes in. She talks about her family and how she met her investment banker husband. Southern girls know how to win a man, she winks, gesturing to her coffee table book of her home state, Virginia. She recalls how her father used to ask her after every party from preschool on up, "Were you the prettiest girl there?" The question still haunts her. How do you stay the prettiest girl at the party while winding your way into the cobwebbed halls of your 40s? Even at 31, I have quickly learned that to be a woman in New York's Westchester County is to fear aging above all else. In the hallway outside her bedroom, Mrs. M describes the noises of the phantom girl in the attic. She adds, "My husband thinks we're crazy. He doesn't hear a thing. But I don't know what he does hear. He has no idea how often I think about divorce." Sometimes the scariest things don't live in the attic. We stand near Mr. and Mrs. M's king-sized bed covered with monogrammed Matuk linens and pray from the papers in our hands. Holy Spirit, fill this place and minister to the hearts of those who abide here. In the kitchen, we pray for God to fill the hungry with good things. In the dining room, we ask Christ to nourish body and soul. We go from room to room, and I silently add a blessing for my own house. It's 2007, and I'm in my first adult home, my first pastor job, my first year in New York, and my first year of marriage. The specter of making it all work feels like an ominous maze. As Mrs. M and I say goodbye, I wonder if either of us will have the courage to confront what frightens us most. What really keeps us up at night? What parts of us have become more dead than alive? What will free us to come home to ourselves? A few days later, I call to check in. The ghost is still there, Mrs. M laughs, but she's quieter now. Maybe she's finally figuring out what she wants. Edward McCann is an award-winning writer and producer and the founder and editor of Read650, celebrating writers and the spoken word with live events, publications, and a weekly podcast. His features and essays have been published in many literary journals, anthologies, and national magazines, including Better Homes and Gardens, The Irish Echo, The Sun, Milieu, and others. Ed lives and writes adjacent to the Shawangunk Ridge in Gardner, New York, and he's at work on a memoir and a collection of essays about life in the Hudson Valley. Today, Ed time travels back to a teenage summer night in Brooklyn and an encounter with a mysterious woman beneath a full moon. He closes today's show with The Fortune Teller's Curse. Please give a warm welcome back to Ed McCann.
It was a hot summer Friday night in Brooklyn, and I was 17 years old. My girlfriend Donna and I had just worked the closing shift at Wallbaum Supermarket. After counting our tills, we ditched our name tags and smocks, punched out, and walked over to the Carvel ice cream store, where our friend Harold was closing up. The three of us then walked up Pennsylvania Avenue toward the Belt Parkway, where a street fair had suddenly materialized, with rides, games, and food trucks. We could see the lights of a Ferris wheel winking between the apartment towers, while above Jamaica Bay, thin clouds scudded across a full moon. From blocks away, we could hear the thumping beat of the music and could smell grilled sausage, fried dough, and marijuana. With my girlfriend on my arm and a pocket full of payday, I arrived at the entrance gate with a vague sense of foreboding. Once inside, Harold met up with his girlfriend Debbie, and we explored the carnival, cruising past kettle corn, hot dog, and cotton candy vendors. After eating sausage and pepper heroes, we waited in line for a ride on a giant whirling centrifuge filled with screaming human beings, our backs pinned to the wall as it spun and lifted us into the air while the floor beneath us fell away. Later, on shaky legs, we watched a man make balloon animals and tried to ignore carnival barkers touting giant stuffed animals and cash prizes. But one game seemed too tempting and too easy to win. The smiling, smoking carny stood behind a line of duct tape on the blacktop, tossing thin wooden rings onto the necks of beer bottles set in a bowling pin formation. "Here," the man said, "try a round for free." The 3 rings were smooth and polished, about the diameter of a donut. I missed my first shot, but with a gentle underhand toss, I landed the second 2 as my friends cheered. His double or nothing game went like this. I'd pay $20 to toss 3 rings. If I landed one on the center bottle, I'd win $40. If I missed, my next try would cost $40, but enable me to win $80. A minute later, I was out $80. Embarrassed and enraged, I then traded $160, the rest of my week's pay, for another try. The wooden rings clinked and bounced away. But for another $320, I could win $640. Yes, the carny would wait, and so I ran. I ran 6 blocks to an ATM machine. Sweaty and breathless, I stared at the paltry bank balance displayed on that cathode ray screen, absorbing the full weight of what a sucker I had been. I was a mark, a dupe, a dope. I left what little money I still had in the bank. Deflated, I returned to the carnival to tell Mr. Double or Nothing that we were done, and then I walked away with my friends. But as we approached the exit, I locked eyes with a heavily made-up woman seated inside an illuminated booth. She wore a fringed headscarf, large hoop earrings, many bangles on her wrists, and several strings of beads around her neck. Humiliated by my recent defeat, I felt powerless to resist when she beckoned with one long red fingernail, offering to tell my fortune. Already falling under her spell, I gave the woman my last $5. She took my hands in hers, then lightly and seductively traced the lines of my palm with those long red nails. She stopped twice to study my face, then stared, trance-like, through me and beyond me. And what she finally said at midnight, beneath that full moon, has haunted me my entire adult life. While still holding my hand, her green eyes locked on mine, the fortune and the future the woman foretold landed like a curse. "You will never be rich," she said, "but you'll never be poor. You will always have just enough to get by." Will all of the writers please come join me? All the writers, come on up on stage. As many of you know, we were scheduled to be here in this theater earlier this year, in March last year. We had assembled a cast, and we'd printed posters and programs and ordered food and wine for a reception. But a few days before the show, New Rochelle had become the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. And before anyone realized the scale of what we were about to face, I canceled that show. And we built Read650 around live performances like this one, but suddenly it wasn't safe for us to gather in person. And I struggled for months to find a way forward and find a way to serve our mission to promote writers. This past spring, we were invited to be part of Carnegie Hall's Voices of Hope Festival, and we launched what has become a weekly half-hour podcast. That invitation from Carnegie Hall gave us a path forward, and we pivoted in a way that allows us to also feature work from writers around the country and also from outside the country. I am very proud of what we have built together with your support. And I'm so grateful to all of you because in the last, countless nonprofit organizations have failed and closed in the last 18 months. And we have not. We're still here and we're still growing. And we simply cannot do what we do without you. And you are the reason we're here. And this round of applause from all of us here on this stage is for all of you and for all of you. So thank you all again for joining us today, and please don't rush off, because while we wrap things up here, you can step outside and join us at a reception in Ruby D. Park and enjoy some refreshments and sip and nibble and schmooze with the writers and each other and talk about reading and writing and the stories that you've heard here this afternoon. I also ask that you please follow the podcast and like our Facebook page, explore our website, and if you like to join our emailing list by sharing your email address on one of the clipboards outside, which we will never share with anyone else, we will keep you apprised of what we're doing. And finally, please consider investing in our mission to promote writers and quality spoken word events like this with a tax-deductible donation. All of us really appreciate you being here today and hope that you will join us for some snacks outside. And now, as we close the show, we're going to do something that we have not rehearsed and we've never done before. We're going to take a bow. Come on out here.
Oh, yeah.